Hi, I'm Mark Long, CEO of Neon Media, and I'm joined today by Adam Foshko, narrative director at HBO and writer and director of several Call of Duties and the Skylanders franchise. And Derek Kolstad, the creator writer of the John Wick series and the new Disney Plus series, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And we're here to talk about what makes a great writer's room. Adam, what is a writer's room?
That's a good question. Thanks for the great introduction, Mark. I think that to boil it down, I've heard it called either a taste of heaven or an extra helping of hell. It basically is a place where, unlike when someone goes and writes a film or writes a novel or something, their writers will work independently on their own for hours and hours and hours, usually staring at a blank page until blood appears on their forehead. But in a writer's room, you take all kinds of different writers with different skill sets and you put them together. This came out of television, where they were basically writing series, and they come up with ideas and jokes and gags and storylines, and they would basically come up with entire television series in sort of a very compressed atmosphere, where I think you talk about everything else possible up until the 11th hour, and then you finally talk about work. But it is a place really where I think where great story is made, and we've adopted that into great game development as well.
Derek, it sounds like a lot of fun, is it?
It starts out that way. In my experience, this was my first room, and it's the only one I've done so far. And Malcolm, he was the guy who was running the show. And on the first day in, he would repeat over and over and over again that, in essence, the best idea wins. And when you have that filter on everything, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. It's what matters is who's best in the moment. And in the best of rooms, you clamor and get behind that, and you build upon it. There's no infighting, because come the end of it, and Falcon Winter Soldier, you had a very limited timeline. The beast of Marvel, the beast of Disney, the beast of Disney Plus, and you wanted to get to the finish line quickly and yet intact, and in such a way that if you got a call at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday saying season 2's a go, you're like, fuck yeah. So that was my introduction to it, and it's hard, and yet at the same time it's a thrill.
Adam, this audience is primarily C-level game executives. Why should we care or know anything about writers' rooms?
I think writers' rooms, borrowing from best practices in television. I mean, I come from a television family, and my father worked in rooms, and so it's sort of ingrained in sort of how I was raised. But I've also found historically that we really just get the best stuff in the shortest amount of time working with a room. And also, as I think Derek will attest, he just sort of alluded to it, that we now make product seasonally, year over year. And so really we're making an investment in not just the franchises we create, but the people who work on those franchises. And so really we're able to continue to produce product, first of all, in a much more efficient and timely manner than having to spin up an individual writer or a set of individual writers who are all working separately on a particular game from a standing start, and then re-spinning that up again later. Now we have a room, we have people who are already familiar with the franchise and the Bible and where it's going, and already we're projecting ahead by a good number of years. It did that with Destiny, certainly did that with Skylanders, and Call of Duty was very similar in terms of its franchise goals. But Destiny in particular, because we would chart it out a good number of years, there'd be no way to say, okay, bring in X writer and come in and take this over and not lose precious time. Not only being familiarizing that person with where things had gone, where things had been narratively and where they were going, but also just in terms of what the medium is. It's very there's a lot of synergy between television and game development, much more so, I believe, than feature film. But still, it's like literally putting the wings of the plane on while you're flying it, and also updating the telemetry. So it's it's an ongoing process, and it's just a more efficient way to work.
The executive producer in me just heard that it goes faster. So if you say it takes 6 months for you to write it, if I get 6 guys in a room, they can write it in 1 month.
Is that better? It also depends how much blood we're talking about. I mean, and the thing also is, I'm a huge believer in table reads, and I imagine Derek, has a lot of experience with that as well. And no matter how great your dialogue is or your story is, there's a certain point when you're breaking story, and then as you're producing scenes and as you're writing dialogue, there's certainly a certain point where people are pitching ideas. Where, as Derek has pointed out rightly, the best rooms are run where best idea wins. Also, the best line wins. And in the end, once you say your dialogue out loud, before you have actors come in and do whatever else, I mean, that's the room to really test all that. I mean, that's really the place where you really want to kind of run it through the ringer. So much harder to do in a siloed environment. So I would actually say, as opposed to 6 guys in a room and it gets done a sixth of the time, I would say that you actually are making enormous headway on in the polish phase, because you're actually making an investment along the way. You're not doing these massive rewrites. It's all being done as you're going.
Derek, Adam used the term breaking story, which I've heard before. What does that mean?
Well, in essence, that's the work, you know. And again, it was trial by fire in the best of ways for me. And Malcolm had come in with what he wanted the story to be, but then you have to look at the 6-episode structure, and which is always weird. And what I mean by weird is anytime you've got a good idea or a story you want to tell, and you have to divvy it up into chapters. How are you going to do that? Once you get to that point, you're like, okay, great. Now let's look at the action, the heartbeat, the soul, the pacing, the pulse of each episode. Okay, we got that. Great. Now let's layer in the character moments, the hero's journey. Now there's more than one hero. Even the bad guy has a hero's journey. Okay. Now it's literally rinse, wash, and repeat, because as soon as you layer in one element on top of what was layered in before, none of it makes sense. So you have to massage, and you have to take care of the ripple effect. So, we often joke about that. By the time you're off to script, you got a couple of days, because all of the work is done. Now, your skill set should be the dialogue and the ability to actually put that on page. But the work, the mental heavy lifting is in that room, breaking story and making sure that your character is fully in focus.
Well, that's something new to me. So you guys talk about the story. Breaking story is really talking about it kind of ad nauseum, the picture I'm getting. And then you have a short remaining time at the end to write. Is that typically how writers' rooms works?
I've just been in the one, man. So
that makes you an expert, though.
It does. You've been in some good room. I mean, it's a good room. It's not it wasn't on the Home Shopping Network.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a solid home run. Look, it's an ongoing thing, right? Because it depends on the scale of what it is you're writing. If it's a big epic title for games, if it's a big epic title, there's an enormous amount of talking at the head end of this, because not only are you trying to sort out the technology that is making this thing possible, with the direction that ideally the train is already going in. We want to cover these 5 or 6 major things in this release, but then also character arcs, and then you're keeping all that in your head as you're literally saying, okay, now what's the actual emotional journey? I mean, Derek rightly pointed out the hero's journey. Everybody has their own hero's journey, but as someone who's experiencing this, the entire room is putting themselves in the place of someone who is experiencing this. And it's not just what's happening on the screen. It's not just a story being told to us. It's experiential. So we're actually having to then create the context, the world building aspect of this as we are experiencing the story over time. It's the emotional beats of not just the cinematics that you're seeing, if you're seeing cinematics, but also the levels and the level design. This all happens in the room as well. And we're also bringing in different experts who are narrative designers and level designers, and it's akin to bringing in the crew or the chiefs of the departments as you're actually putting your series together, I think, in a lot of ways. And so certainly your DP would be a part of that, whether it's a film or television. But it's all of those people are in at the same time, and we're all taking this journey together. So really, there's a point where you're breaking the story and you're working it out with the writers, and you're making assignments so people can actually write, and then they're being paired off often depending on what it is they like to write. But then you're also using that opportunity to bring other people into that room and take them on that same journey. And they are the litmus test in so many ways, because it can all be in our heads and we're selling each other on it. But in the end, we have to take them on that journey. And then we have to all collectively make that happen before you even bring an actor in. And that's a whole other situation. So really, writing doesn't happen at the end. Writing sort of happens sort of in a continuous cycle of rinse and repeat, as you're continuing to produce.
And leaning into that, one of the funny things and the most humble things is when, even before, like the first week I was in Falcon Winter Soldier, we were each given, you're going to do this episode, you're going to do these 2 episodes, just so you know, they were just divvying up that way. And so by the end of the room, when you've in essence turned in one of your episodes and you're almost done with your other episode, and someone has an idea and they don't really want to share it, Malcolm says, come on, if it's good, share it. And they share it. And he goes, fuck, that's good. And all the other writers are like, no, that is good. But the backwards ripple effect on everything that's been written, it needs to be ripped out and layered in like a new spine. And yet, if you're in the good room, you don't mind doing that, because that idea, if it makes it 0.5% better, makes everything better, man. So you just ride with the wave.
That sounds like one of the secrets of a great room. Did you pick up any other great secrets, Derek?
Honestly, it goes back to like my dad and grandfather in business, but like have a thick skin, but never lose your heart, So like, I loved that someone would passionately in the room pitch an idea, and then near the end of the pitch would either realize it wasn't working or they'd be rejected. Right now, we're writers. Like, I don't think people understand how much rejection, and to a certain point, it's like a heroin dose where you're like, I need my rejection today, is the ability not to bounce back, but to roll with it. Because when you roll with it, the best football players tend to, miss the first one and then shift and get the second, and that's much more important. So to me, it isn't a matter of being the smartest guy in the room. It's just recognizing the room and your place in it and how to make that room a better room. And back to what we've discussed in the past, is those simple little things. It's amazing having a lot of soda, candy, and free lunch will do for anyone's spirits. And that's
What about you, Adam? Do you think there's any secrets to running a great writer's room?
Actually, what Derek just said, I think is probably one of the best. I mean, when my father worked in television, one of the things he would always do is he would, keep all the writers fed and watered. It's pretty much how it worked in every room I've been in, whether it's television or certainly in games. It was always about um, keeping everybody buoyant, reading the room, because there are times when the work is hard. I mean, when you're literally pulling stuff out of the air, as fun as it all is, it's exhausting. There's a certain point where you go, have we been here for 8 hours? You have to read the room and understand what the energy level is in the room, make sure people take enough breaks and don't exhaust them. There's plenty of time to get exhausted, but I think having a lot of open communication is incredibly important. Not hanging on to things like grim death is wildly important. It really comes down to the pace that's set, and the environment that's set by the showrunner, the guy who's running the room. And if you have a great one, then that's, it's he's worth his weight in gold. And I think really apart from that, it's also understanding that very rarely is it a sprint, but it is almost always a gigantic marathon. And there are just cycles to it, and there are times when everyone can knock off and go home at a reasonable time, and that's a really good thing, conserve energy, and there's a point where of diminishing returns. And there's also times when everyone puts their hands to the oar. And I think that also, if you have a guy who's running a room who is willing to do exactly what they're asking the room to do, then there's that sense of we're all in it together, right? So it's I think it comes down to really, I think, who's running it.
Oh, and the nice thing in regards to what you're saying too is if you break the story well, if I'm on episode 3 or 4, which were mine, and I got to a point where I'm like, something's just not working, I could call or email everyone saying, I'm at this point. And it isn't that I'm butting up against anything. I see where we're going. And what was nice about that is the classic, I was so far into the woods, I wasn't seeing the trees. And not once did anyone not come back with like, oh, there it is. And usually it's that little thing to keep you on track. And they were excited to get your phone call and excited to put you on the path and excited to be there once you get out of it. I think the camaraderie, just from like a sports movie standpoint, is true.
All 3 of us have written long form, which is solo, and I really enjoyed that process. Although you get to a point like when when you go to the eye doctor and they put that weird Brazil looking thing in front of your eye and they go, is this better? Is that better? Is this better? Is that better? It's,
Mm.
I get as I progress in finishing a manuscript, I kind of get to that point. You don't have anybody to tell you if this is better or that's better,
Yeah.
right? Derek, what's been the difference for you in writing Wick solo and then working in a writer's room, and which one do you prefer?
Honestly, I really dig them both now. I didn't think I'm very much I like being alone in a cave with a computer, that kind of guy, you know. But what I liked about the writer's room is realizing that not only are you playing with new friends in a sandbox, but you built the fucking thing and you fill it with the fucking sand, and that's
Mhm.
really exciting, you know. And yet, the one thing that isn't it's the hardest part about both long form and the shorter form is that when you got notes back, it's different by who hired you for the job. Like when we got notes back from Marvel, um, they had all of the notes, they had discussed all of the notes, and you had a playbook. I've worked in movies where I'll get emails from two different very powerful people with very conflicting ideas. I didn't know what to do. So the art of manipulating those waters is kind of the same. Yet at the same point, the joy of being alone in a room with a blank page one and it's just all you, I fucking love that. I mean, that is the height of what I am and what I do and my ultimate joy. And yet when you're in a room and someone gives you an idea and you're like, oh, and you're just like, yes, that is an equal joy. So I think honestly, I'm a movie guy. I grew up a movie guy. I could be a movie guy. I'm a game guy. But TV, the stories we can tell nowadays, especially in the advent of a streamer and post the nascent days of HBO, it's kind of cool.
Hey, Adam, given the current circumstances, do you think it's possible to run a writer's room long distance like this on Zoom?
I do. I really do. I think that this is I mean, now more and more elements of working independently in Derek's cave is sort of, we're all doing it in a lot of ways. So I mean, there is a lot of opportunity for that. And really, when you get down to it, even though a story's been broken, you do end up writing a fair amount in your cave anyway. You just bring it back to a room. So whether I physically hop into a car and I go to a room that I'm running somewhere, or I'm in a room, or I'm getting on something like getting onto Zoom, it's kind of the same thing. 'Cause you really, now you're pitching the ideas. You're missing some of the aromas of being in a writer's room where everybody has it's after lunch and everyone has been there for 8 hours. So there's a certain level of atmosphere that is missing. But that's fine. You can do so much more. I think because you can modulate also what this experience is now. You can still pitch your ideas. You can do all the things you can do in a room, and also I think appeal to writers. We're largely, even though we talk to a lot of people, there's a certain portion of our psyche which is entirely introverted, and we don't necessarily have to want to go and see a lot of people and have to drive and go and sit in a room with a bunch of folks. But we can do this, and I think it fills the bill. I think you do miss some of the late night things that happen. Good ideas sometimes happen when you really are putting effort in, and you can physically read people. When you see them on little, in a gallery, you're not quite reading the room the same way that you read a lot of body language when you're actually in a room. And I think there's something that's missing there. And I think that there's a real art form to being able to read a writer's room and to sort of get people's sense of where they are in terms of their creative energy, like where the energy they have to invest. So I think that's missing, but I think the basis of it is there, and I think we can keep working with it.
And I would miss the one-on-one, and like when you go down for a cup of coffee and you kind of splinter off and get to know each other. Not saying that you can't do that here, but the number of times just outside of the writer's room, how you get to know people, how that those relationships in the best of ways bring the best of you back to the writer's room. But dude, the past couple of weeks on Zoom here have kind of shown us that why the fuck did I drive 5 hours yesterday? You know?
It is the commute. It is the commute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do get back almost half my day, sort of
Yeah.
being in one place, which isn't bad. And plus, I don't know, Derek, did you find that you had to deal with a lot of people on the East Coast or international people?
International, yeah, but that's always like in regards to script. If it's an actor, it's near the end, and we're just going through like their lines, like, and so it's very much personalized. Because I don't believe any script should be biblical. I mean, it should be,
Yeah.
you know, you hire a guy and have him go through and say, "How would you say it?" You know, and then sometimes at the beginning you'll talk to distributors, but they're kind of going not the way of the dodo, but evolving in such a way that we're not quite sure what it's going to be. But a lot of the time, even nowadays, if you want to be in this industry, it's, you know, it's LA. To a smaller degree, it's New York or London, and you know, if you have the connections in Austin or whatever, you know, or
Yeah.
maybe to fly, but like there is some kind of psychological appeal for everyone, especially the buyers, to know that if worse comes to worse, they can drive 11 minutes, which takes 3.5 hours.
That's right.
I have just one final question. Derek, why doesn't John Wick name his dog?
You know, I can answer that. Because we couldn't come up with something that was cool and not too tongue-in-cheek and not too on the nose, that when it just became dog, we were all like, yeah, that kind of fits him. So I wish I had a more romantic story, and I don't have any other names we were going to call him, but like we wanted him never to reference it by name until at a certain point you realize he kind of had to. And to have John Wick have the dog, that's okay.
Well, I want to thank Derek Kolstad and Adam Foshko for joining me, and I'd like to thank Dean Takahashi for giving us this opportunity to talk about what makes writers' rooms great. Thanks, Dean.
Pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Derek.